Hey everyone. So I know a lot of you out there have been asking about how to stay consistent, especially when you're teaching yourself to code. And I always love hearing from you guys. So one listener actually sent in this super interesting blog post from Algo Academy. And it really got me thinking. It's all about how even little tiny improvements you make every day can lead to huge gains in the long run. They even say you could be like 37 times better after a year just from making tiny changes each day.
So
So
that's pretty wild when you think about it, right? Like 37 times better? I mean, what would that even look like in real life?
exactly. So that's what we're going to unpack today in this deep dive, this whole idea of the compound effect and how it applies to learning to code. And I'm so excited to have our expert here to break it all down for us. So
Yeah.
let's start with the basics. How does this whole compound effect thing actually work? Like, what's the science behind it?
So it's actually pretty fascinating. When you practice something consistently, whether it's coding or playing an instrument or even just speaking a new language, you're essentially building muscle memory. But it's not just in your muscles, it's in your brain too. The more you repeat an action or a thought process, the stronger those neural pathways become.
So it's like you're actually rewiring your brain to think more like a coder.
Exactly. And that's one of the big reasons why consistency is so important. It's not just about memorizing syntax or commands. It's about developing a deeper understanding of how things work. So you can start to see patterns, recognize potential errors, and write code more efficiently.
That makes total sense. I remember when I first started learning Python, it would take me forever to debug even the simplest syntax errors. But now I can spot those things almost instantly. It's like my brain has learned to automatically flag them.
Right. That's a perfect example of how consistent practice can build that intuitive sense you're talking about.
But I'm sure there are still times when you hit a wall, right? Like even with all that experience, there's still concepts that trip you up or problems that seem impossible to solve.
Oh, absolutely. Every coder experiences those moments of frustration. No matter how skilled you are, there will always be new challenges to tackle and new plateaus to overcome.
So how do you push through those tough spots?
Well, that's where consistency becomes even more crucial. When you feel stuck, it's tempting to give up or take a break. But it's actually those moments when pushing through the struggle is the most important. Because it's on the other side of that struggle that you often have those breakthrough
Those
moments.
aha moments where everything suddenly clicks.
Exactly. And those breakthroughs are what fuel your motivation and keep you moving forward.
Okay, so let's go back to that 37 times better idea for a second. I have to admit, it sounds pretty amazing, but I'm also a little skeptical. Like, is that really possible just from making small improvements every day?
I get the skepticism, but the math actually checks out. The blog post explains it using a simple pseudocode example. So imagine you improve your skills just 1% each day. That might not seem like much in the moment,
Yeah, it sounds pretty tiny.
but when you compound that growth over a year, the results are exponential. You end up with a 37x improvement over where you started.
Wow, so even small changes, when done consistently, can really snowball into something huge.
Exactly. It's like the classic saying, slow and steady wins the race.
So what does that 1% actually look like in the real world? Like, what are some concrete examples of those small daily improvements?
It could be anything, really. You could be learning a new function, understanding a complex algorithm, writing code that's more efficient, or even just spending a few minutes reviewing concepts you've already learned.
So basically, any effort that moves you forward in your learning journey.
Exactly. It's all about making progress, no matter how small it seems in the moment.
I love that. So speaking of seeing this principle in action, the blog post had a couple of case studies that really stood out to me. Sarah and Mike, right?
Oh yeah, those were really inspiring. Sarah's story was especially impressive.
Yeah, she went from working in marketing to becoming a full stack developer in just a year.
And she did it all by making time to code for just an hour each day.
She started with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? Then moved on to React and eventually tackled back-end development.
It's amazing how much she accomplished in such a relatively short time.
And then there's Mike, who was determined to land a tech internship. So he committed to solving one algorithm problem on Algo Academy every single day.
And he didn't stop there. He also participated in weekly coding contests and even scheduled monthly mock interviews. Talk about dedication.
And it all paid off. He landed an internship at a top tech company within 6 months.
Those stories might be hypothetical, but they really show how consistent effort, even in small doses, can lead to remarkable achievements.
Okay, so we've established that consistency is key. But let's be real for a second. It's easier said than done, right? Life gets in the way, motivation fades, and sometimes the sheer amount of information out there can be totally overwhelming.
You're absolutely right. It's definitely not always easy to stay consistent.
So what can we do when we hit those inevitable roadblocks?
Well, the blog post actually has some great advice for that. Starting with the classic excuse, I don't have enough time.
Oh, tell me about it. That's my go-to excuse.
But the truth is, we all have the same 24 hours in a day. It's all about prioritizing and being intentional with how we use our time.
So what are some strategies for actually doing that?
One tip is to start small. Even just dedicating 15 or 30 minutes each day to coding is better than nothing.
That seems much more manageable than thinking about hours and hours of practice.
Right, and if you're struggling to find those pockets of time, try incorporating time management techniques like the Pomodoro method.
Where you work in focused bursts with short breaks in between.
Exactly. That can be really helpful for maximizing those shorter coding sessions.
But what about when motivation starts to dwindle, like when you're just not feeling it?
That's something we all experience. One strategy that can help is to set small, achievable goals for each coding session.
So instead of focusing on the big, overwhelming picture, you break it down into smaller, more manageable steps.
Right. And each time you achieve one of those small goals.
It gives you a sense of accomplishment and motivates you to keep going.
Exactly. And don't forget to celebrate those wins, no matter how small they seem.
I also can't stress enough the importance of finding a supportive community, whether it's a coding buddy, an online forum, or the local meetup group. Having people who understand your journey can make all the difference.
Definitely. It's so much easier to stay motivated and accountable when you're surrounded by others who are working towards similar goals.
And last but not least, what about when you're just feeling overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information out there? Like there's so much to learn. Where do you even start?
That's a common feeling, especially for self-taught programmers. The key is to create a structured learning plan. Choose one specific area to focus on at a time and use platforms like Algo Academy to guide your learning.
Yeah, they have those curated learning paths, right? Which can be really helpful for taking the guesswork out of the process.
Exactly. They offer a structured approach, gradually increasing in difficulty. So you're constantly challenged, but not overwhelmed.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of consistency. We've explored some of the common obstacles and even brainstormed some strategies for overcoming them. Now let's dive into some practical tips for actually making this a habit.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Well, the blog post had a bunch of great suggestions, but one that really resonated with me is setting clear goals, both short-term and long-term.
Goals give you direction and purpose.
It's like having a roadmap for your coding journey.
Exactly. So, for example, a short-term goal could be to learn the basics of Python in a month, while a long-term goal could be to build a mobile app by the end of the year.
That's a great way to think about it.
And once you have those goals in mind, it's important to create a schedule and treat those coding sessions like important appointments.
Like an appointment with your future self.
Exactly. You wouldn't skip a doctor's appointment or a job interview, so why skip your coding practice?
And don't underestimate the power of tracking your progress, whether it's marking a calendar for each day you code, or keeping a coding journal to document your learnings and challenges.
That's a great idea. It's a visual reminder of your commitment, how far you've come.
And as we mentioned earlier, joining a community can be super helpful for staying motivated and accountable. It's amazing how much sharing your journey with others can boost your commitment.
It's like having a built-in support system to cheer you on and help you through those tough spots.
Now, this next tip is one of my personal favorites, the don't break the chain method.
Ah, yes, the Jerry Seinfeld approach. I love that one.
It's so simple but effective.
Basically, you mark a calendar for each day you complete your coding practice. And the goal is to build a chain of marked days and avoid breaking it at all costs.
It's like a visual representation of your consistency.
And it can be incredibly motivating to see that chain grow longer and longer.
Okay, last but not least, remember to actually enjoy the process. Learning to code shouldn't feel like a chore.
Right, you should be an adventure.
It's about embracing the challenge, celebrating those small wins, and finding joy in the process of creating something from scratch.
And speaking of finding joy, I think the blog post really highlights how platforms like Algo Academy can make the learning process more engaging and fun.
Oh, definitely. I've heard great things about their interactive coding environments, and the way they gradually increase the difficulty keeps you challenged without feeling overwhelmed.
And they often incorporate those gamification elements we talked about earlier, like streaks and badges.
Which can be surprisingly motivating, even for someone like me who doesn't usually consider themselves a gamer.
It's all about finding those little things that keep you coming back for more.
So beyond those immediate benefits, let's zoom out for a second and consider the long-term advantages of making consistency your coding superpower.
I like that term, coding superpower.
So what are those long-term benefits?
Well, first and foremost, consistent practice accelerates your skill development. You'll find yourself tackling more complex problems with greater ease and confidence.
And that confidence will spill over into other areas of your life as well.
Absolutely. And the analytical and problem-solving skills you hone through coding, those are incredibly valuable, not just in tech, but in all aspects of life.
So it's not just about becoming a better coder, it's about becoming a better thinker overall.
Precisely. And as you consistently overcome challenges and witness your progress, your confidence will soar, which makes you a more attractive candidate to potential employers.
And lastly, consistent learning helps you adapt to new technologies as they emerge.
The tech landscape is constantly evolving, so being a lifelong learner is essential for staying ahead of the curve.
This has been such an insightful conversation. I feel like I have a much deeper understanding of why consistency is so crucial, especially for self-taught programmers like myself.
It's been a pleasure exploring these concepts with you.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, there's something that's been swirling around in my mind, and I wanted to get your take on it.
I'm all ears. What is it?
Well, the blog post talked about tracking things like coding streaks, problem solved, and concepts mastered, which are all great indicators of progress.
Absolutely. Those are valuable metrics.
But here's a thought. What if we also tracked those times when we wanted to code but didn't?
I haven't heard that one before. Tell me more.
It seemed like those moments of resistance, when we choose not to practice, could be just as valuable as the times when we do.
I see what you mean. It's about understanding those patterns and triggers that lead to those moments of avoidance.
Exactly. Like maybe you always skip coding on Friday nights because you're exhausted from the week, or you avoid practice after a particularly tough coding challenge. By becoming aware of these patterns, we could start to develop strategies to address them.
It's like turning those moments of resistance into valuable data points. And then you can use that data to become more consistent in the long run.
Yeah, like instead of just beating ourselves up for not coding, we can actually learn from those moments.
Exactly. So let's say you notice that you always hit a slump on Friday nights. Maybe you need to adjust your schedule to code earlier in the day, when you have more energy.
Or maybe you could try breaking down those challenging concepts into smaller chunks and tackle them earlier in the week when you're feeling more focused.
Right. It's all about customizing your approach to fit your unique needs and preferences. And, this idea of tracking those moments of resistance, it actually connects to a broader concept in learning called metacognition.
Metacognition. Remind me what that is again.
Basically, it's the ability to think about your own thinking.
Okay.
So it's about becoming aware of your learning process, like what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, and what strategies work best for you.
So it's not just about learning to code, it's about learning how you learn best.
Exactly. And by developing that metacognitive awareness, you can become a more effective learner in any field, not just coding.
Wow, it's powerful stuff. So those moments when we don't code can actually become valuable learning experiences in themselves.
Absolutely. They can provide insights that help us fine-tune our approach and become even more consistent in our practice.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground here today, from the power of consistency to those pesky obstacles we all face. And we even brainstormed some practical strategies and even talked about tracking those moments of resistance. So before we wrap up, let's quickly recap the key takeaways for our listeners, especially those who are on their self-taught coding journeys.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
So first and foremost, we learned that consistency is like the secret sauce for success as a self-taught programmer.
It's not about those all-night coding marathons or those random bursts of motivation. It's about making coding a regular part of your routine, even if it's just for a few minutes each day.
Right, those small, consistent efforts really do add up over time, leading to some pretty amazing gains in your skills and knowledge.
And remember, those 1% daily improvements can take many forms, from finally conquering that tricky algorithm to writing cleaner code to simply grasping a new concept.
We also talked about those common challenges that can sometimes make consistency feel impossible. Things like lack of time, those dreaded motivation dips, and that feeling of being completely overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information out there.
But thankfully, we have some practical strategies to combat those obstacles.
Like starting small, setting achievable goals, trying out time management techniques like the Pomodoro method, finding a coding buddy or online community for support, and creating a structured learning plan.
And of course, let's not forget the importance of actually enjoying the process.
Yes. Learning to code should be an adventure, not a chore.
It's about embracing the challenge, celebrating those small wins, and finding joy in the process of creation.
And lastly, we had that really interesting discussion about tracking not only our coding wins, but also those times when we choose not to code.
Which, as we discovered, can offer some really valuable insights into our habits and patterns.
It's all about becoming more self-aware, understanding our individual learning styles, and then using that knowledge to create an approach that actually works for us.
Well said.
It's kind of funny when you think about it. We always talk about like those big, impressive milestones, like landing your dream job or shipping a complex project. But it's those tiny little actions that we do every day. Those are the things that really make all the difference.
It's so true. It's like building a house. You need those strong bricks and a solid foundation before you can even think about adding those fancy finishing touches.
Exactly. And speaking of foundations, I think platforms like Algo Academy can be so helpful for self-taught programmers, especially when it comes to building those consistent habits.
Oh, definitely. Those structured learning environments.
Mhm.
With their guided paths and interactive exercises, they can make it so much easier to stay on track.
I've also heard they have features like automated code checking, which gives you like instant feedback on your code so you can catch those errors early on.
Right. It's like having a virtual coding buddy right there with you, pointing out those mistakes and helping you learn from them.
And of course, we can't forget about those gamification elements, like streaks and badges. Even for someone like me who doesn't really consider myself a gamer, those little things can be surprisingly motivating.
It's amazing how a little friendly competition can push you to do your best.
So this whole deep dive has really got me thinking about consistency in a new way. It's not just about discipline or willpower. It's about creating systems and strategies that actually support our goals.
It's about designing an environment where consistency becomes almost effortless.
Okay, so before we officially wrap things up, I wanted to leave our listener with one final thought to chew on. It kind of builds on that idea we were talking about earlier, about tracking those moments of resistance. You know those times when you wanted to code but didn't?
Yeah, I remember.
What if we took it a step further? And instead of just noting those moments down, we tried to really understand the why behind those choices.
Oh, that's interesting. Like digging a little deeper and asking ourselves, why did I skip coding today? What was going on in my life?
Exactly. So instead of just saying, oh, I was tired, we could ask ourselves, okay, why was I tired? Was it because of work? Was I stressed out about something? Did I not get enough sleep?
It's like getting curious about those patterns
Yeah,
and then using that information to make more informed choices.
right. And maybe by understanding those deeper reasons, we can start to make changes that support not only our coding practice, but our overall well-being too.
It's like that saying, a healthy mind and a healthy body. If you're not taking care of yourself, it's going to be harder to show up consistently for anything.
So to our listener out there who's struggling with consistency, just remember, those moments of resistance aren't failures. They're actually opportunities for self-discovery.
Yeah, they're like little clues. They can help you understand yourself better
Yeah.
and create a learning approach that really works for you.
All right, well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We hope you've gained some valuable insights today and are feeling inspired to embrace the power of consistency in your own coding journey.
Remember, even the smallest steps, taken consistently, can lead to some pretty amazing results. So keep those 1% daily games in mind. And we'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.
Happy coding, everyone.